Chapter 27. The second day of the trip was uneventful. Imogen found she really enjoyed watching the guests interact. Each night, they ended with a campfire and s'mores. The last day's trail ride was a lot more exciting. There was a crispness to the air that had the horses a little more awake, so Imogen had to focus more. Fortune walked at a fast clip, which was inconvenient since she was in the back again, so she had to keep slowing him so he didn't end up in the next horse's tail. The wide trail Bailey chose was a little more technical, but still beginner-friendly, and looped around a large pond. The trail allowed the riders to fan out and not keep their horses in line as easily, so Gabe was busy trotting up and down, trying to keep everyone together. A few times, Imogen had to break from the back and help him, which she found was a lot of fun. While yesterday had more of a meditation-type ride, today she had to be a lot more focused and ride the horse under her, something she preferred. Rather than loop back to the camp for lunch, on the last day they were to stop at the pond and have a picnic. Harper had made the most amazing sandwiches, sliced turkey breast with brie and fig jam on sourdough. Yum. There were vegetarian options too, and some side salads, but Imogen was obsessed with her sandwich, so much that she licked her fingers clean. She sat apart from the guests, giving them space, and taking advantage of a large rock near where the horses grazed. Fortune had somehow found his way over to her, grazing between her feet. "Have you ever heard of personal space, buddy?" He sneezed and kept eating. With one hand on the last bite of her sandwich, she reached down with the other to scratch between his ears. She looked up as a shadow cast over her. Gabe hesitated, then asked, "Do you mind if I sit with you?" She smiled. "No, please. Have a slice of my rock." "Oh, sure. Give me the sharp side, why don't you?" She smirked, knowing he was just teasing. "You probably deserve it. I heard a rumor that Penelope has a crush on you." Her response surprised a laugh out of him. "What? I would never. She's married." Imogen grinned wickedly and nudged him with a shoulder, and she popped the last piece of sandwich into her mouth. After swallowing, she assured him, "I'm teasing. Well, not about the crush, she has one, but her husband doesn't seem fazed. It seems like an innocent enough thing." He didn't know how to respond. It felt weird to talk about someone having a crush on him when the only woman he was interested in was sitting next to him. He didn't say anything at all. Imogen was used to his quiet demeanor and didn't think anything of it. Instead, she kept talking. "I think it was when her horse spooked and you rode up like some cowboy to grab her reins and calm her down. Now it's all she can talk about. How you saved her life." Now a blush crept up his neck. He was feeling incredibly uncomfortable. Gabe tried to change the subject. Bianca called. She's home from the hospital and recovering there. Apparently her father is doting on her and driving her crazy." "Ha!" Now it was Imogen's turn to laugh. "I'm glad she's out, but I can't imagine she isn't loving the attention." She paused a moment before asking, "Have you seen her?" Gabe looked at her closely, wanting to see her reaction. "I have. I've stopped by a few times to check on her, in the hospital and at home." He licked his lips nervously. "Does that bother you?" Of course it didn't bother her. Much. While Bianca wasn't nearly as bad as she had thought at first, she still thought she was spoiled and lacked a little compassion when it came to Fortune. The fall wasn't her fault in any way, but clearly Fortune wasn't happy, and instead of backing off and changing tactics, she pushed him until he reacted. It was an explosive partnership that benefited neither of them. She realized her pause was too long. "No, not at all. I think you're a really good friend to her. She doesn't strike me as someone who makes friends easily." Gabe agreed. Bianca was an acquired taste, but she had a good heart. He was about to say so when he noticed one of the portable corral lines was down. Quickly, he began to count heads and found they were missing a horse. He stood up quickly, startling Imogen and Fortune, who was still grazing at her feet. He reached out a hand and helped her up. "There's a horse missing. Come on." "Well, at least it's not Fortune this time," Imogen mused. While Gabe ran over to tell Bailey, Imogen unhooked his bridle from the saddle horn, put it on, stood on the rock, and mounted up. She was really getting the hang of this cowgirl thing. Seeing her, Gabe came straight back. "Imogen, what are you doing?" "I'm going to get the horse, obviously." "Not alone you aren't. You don't know the area, and Fortune is new to you. It's safe if I'm coming." Imogen shrugged. "Then hurry up, because Fortune and I are ready and you aren't." He just shook his head and whistled for Rowdy, who came trotting over. He looked up at Imogen and smirked. "Show off." He laughed and swung up into the saddle. "Imogen, since I've met you, I can't count the number of rescue missions Rowdy and I have been on." "What can I say? I keep things exciting." "You certainly do," he agreed, and they trotted off together. It didn't take them long. The errant trail horse was simply in search of new grass around the bend, just into the tree line, and they quickly caught up to him. Gabe hopped off, put on his bridle, and with the extra rein in hand, remounted swiftly. Imogen and Fortune sat nearby, basically emotional support for all they were needed, but just happy to be out. Gabe walked the horses over, when suddenly he froze. Imogen couldn't explain it except that Gabe and all 3 horses just stopped breathing all at once. It was like someone cast a magic freezing spell, and she was the only one it didn't work on. She slowly looked around, but nothing seemed out of place. She followed Gabe's line of sight, looking behind her shoulder, and sucked in a breath. No, it couldn't be. Not again. Not 20 feet from them, set deeper into the tree line, stood a moose. And not just any moose, but the white moose that was determined to end her life and shoved her car into a ditch. What was she supposed to do? She was afraid to move or even breathe. The moose watched them curiously, but didn't appear aggressive. She knew, even in her short acquaintance, that could change rapidly. Her breath started to come more quickly, and she thought she was about to have her first ever panic attack. Slowly, she felt a hand wrap around her wrist, which had a death grip on her saddle horn. With the smallest movements, she turned to look at Gabe, her eyes wide in terror. He shook his head and held the hand that had been on her wrist up to his lips to remind her to keep quiet. Then he beckoned her to move back, putting distance between her and the moose. Fortune, for his sake, immediately complied and backed slowly until she and Gabe were even. The moose knew they were there, and it wasn't surprised, but things could turn bad quickly if he decided to charge. They slowly backed up as a group until there was enough distance for them to turn and trot towards the picnic, not wanting to move too quickly to incite the moose to chase. Luckily, he stayed put where he belonged, far, far away. When they got back to the camp, Imogen's legs were jelly and she buckled when she dismounted, squealing when Gabe was suddenly behind her, holding her steady as the adrenaline wore off and she shook. "Shh, it's okay, Imogen. I've got you." She couldn't stop shaking. Luckily, Fortune's large body blocked her from the rest of the group, so no one could see her fall to pieces. Tears fell quietly down her face as she leaned forward and hugged the horse. If he hadn't stayed calm, she knew she would have been toast. Gabe still had his hand on her back, rubbing in circles. Without thinking, she turned around and launched herself at him, her arms going around his waist as she cried. Gabe closed his arms around her, holding her tightly against him as she let herself go. He had only known her a short time, but he knew enough to know that she didn't like to show weakness. He moved them more behind the large bay gelding, who for once didn't inconveniently run away, but stayed in place. She held on as if her life depended on it. Eventually she stopped and caught her breath, her cheek resting against the steady thrum of his heart. She could feel his body wrapped around her, cocooning her, and she felt safe. She sighed. It felt nice to be held. Suddenly, hot breath puffed in her ear and she squealed, trying to jump out of Gabe's arms. Fortune had turned his head to snuffle her, but she was sandwiched directly between the two, with nowhere to go. Gabe loosened his grip, keeping one arm on her waist and the other up on the horse's neck, leaning to whisper in her ear, "You're safe." Imogen shivered. She didn't feel safe. She felt nervous all over again. She looked up at him from under her lashes. His blue eyes were laser-focused on hers, and as she watched, they dropped to her lips. Her breath hitched.